Today we have a recording from a workshop held at Christian Community House in East Clare, Ireland, spread over several days on various aspects of Rudolf Steiner's architectural and artistic impulses. The workshop itself was very hands-on, with evening lectures that also had a very visual content, led by our good friend Alan Potter. Because the workshop was so visual and hands-on, we recorded this interview with Alan on the last day as a kind of after-image from the workshop experience. To join us in person for some of these talks, workshops and cultural activities, check out our program of events on our website. We've been here over the last couple of days, I'd say presenting content, but it's a bit more than that, facilitating content around Rudolf Steiner's architectural and artistic work. Would that be a fair sort of summary of the content?
Yes, we made a start. We made an introduction into it, and we really began our work over these last 4 days with recreating, first just through the first lecture and the descriptions and the images that were shown, Rudolf Steiner's first public presentation of an artistic experience, of an artistic working of a space in which one could turn to a spiritual content. And this, of course, was taking place over 100 years ago in a rented hall, in a really a very provisional state. One could call it, in a way, it was the European conference of all the sections of the Theosophical Society in Munich in 1907 at Whitsun, this festival of the word.
Yes, and there is sort of going through all this, I suppose, a little bit of a relationship between the word and these impulses of art and architecture, that they are really a little bit in movement. But maybe before we go into that, we start a little bit with you, because obviously not everyone who listens will know you. I have the great pleasure of knowing you. So maybe you could give a little bit of your own background. How did you encounter the work of Rudolf Steiner and Anthroposophy? Maybe you could share a little bit of your background in the anthroposophical movement over many, many years.
Well,
big question, I know.
That is a very big question. That's a whole conversation in itself, of course. But to put that into 2 sentences, I found my way to anthroposophy in the United States after having finished studying philosophy and psychology in Dublin, and having lived in Germany for a year in Berlin, and my access to anthroposophy, actually this moment where I recognized something that drew me towards anthroposophy, was in a cafe in San Francisco in 1980 in Haight-Ashbury, where they had a large print on the wall of the 50th anniversary of the opening of the second Goetheanum. It intrigued me. And in a way, that path of fascination with this and of deep interest in it led me towards the Christian community and towards Camp Hill. And I've, of course, been active in those movements and in anthroposophy and the society for the last 40 years.
So, I mean, that begins to open up a little bit of that question. But how then did you develop or cultivate this interest specifically in this aspect of Rudolf Steiner's life work, the architecture and the art? I mean, obviously there's an unfolding process that goes with that, so how did that come about in terms of your personal interest?
I think one has to see the context within which Rudolf Steiner introduced art into what was at the time, in a way, a kind of proto-anthroposophical movement coming out of the Theosophical Society. Up to that point, there had been this very strong tradition of the lecture and of written works. And Rudolf Steiner's major books were all produced by before 1907, and he had been working, lecturing in the different sections of the Theosophical Society. And lectures were beginning also to be printed and collated as well. And very much his experience was, and already in 1906, he starts, there he's beginning to talk about these experiences from spiritual research where the medium of art is needed. And probably one of the first examples that one finds there with that is when he turns to the apocalyptic seals, these images from the book of Revelations, where he's in a way creating a kind of matrix upon which the whole book of Revelations can be built around 7 images. And these 7 images are at the heart of this artistic impulse of the Goetheanum. And the Goetheanum, in a way, it is an artistic impulse that has a tremendous overarching coherence to it. It is trying to bring something that is a moving, living, total work of art that exists in the spiritual world, and to find a way of bringing that into physical manifestation, so that you have a vessel, you have a form around you that is pictorially a representation of the astral spiritual world, and is sculpturally a representation of the higher spiritual world. So that what is there in physical image and what is there in sculptural movement and the dynamic of that is something there that you feel it's possible to work with spiritual thoughts and concepts and impulses within the vessel.
But of course this Goetheanum was, I suppose, a next step, and you started off by speaking about this conference, what's often referred to as the Munich conference, which took place in 1907?
That's right, yes, at Whitsun. And it was a gathering of people from all around Europe. And it was also a moment where the dramatic theatre impulse out of anthroposophy really entered into the public domain as well. There was in that conference, it was in a theatre, and there at the heart of the program was the performance of Chouret's play of The Children of Lucifer. So around that there was the anthroposophical speech coming. Mary Steiner's work was already, that was really a moment where it came out into the public. And it was also this moment where the mystery drama impulse, in a way, had its in a way, it was built upon that. It was initiated through this. It was a response that had to come to the Munich conference.
And obviously the Munich conference happened in a space that wasn't just a theatre, but it had, as a space, become an artistic deed or an artistic process.
Yes, it was. And that artistic process had to be built up over a short few weeks before the conference took place. And it was a rented theatre, a rented hall, and there were quite complex negotiations to transform it in the way Rudolf Steiner wanted, that something of these experiences of the spiritual world could be enscened in artistic form in the room. And they weren't able to complete it as far as he would have wished. He would have wished, silken blue cloths on the ceiling and creation of domes and so on. Already these thoughts were there in 1907. What's also interesting about it is that immediately after the conference, and I'm not sure how long they were able to keep the hall in that form with these representations of the pillars and these mandalas, these windows into the Book of Revelations. But immediately afterwards, Rudolf Steiner gives his course, Theosophy of the Rosicrucian. And in this vessel, or in having completed this first space as a vessel for anthroposophy, he's able to give this comprehensive course which has world evolution, reincarnation and karma, the evolution of the earth and man and their relationship, anthroposophy, the paths of initiation. All of this is in this lecture. It's as though he was able to unfold it out into that space once that had been able to land.
Because this was a conference of the Theosophical Society obviously had a more Eastern focus, but Rudolf Steiner was already doing what could be considered Rosicrucian or a very Western focused work. And for example, in the program cover of the Munich conference, one has a Rosicrucian cross with the roses and certain words of significance to Rosicrucianism. So one could really say that that's a little bit of an unfolding in that direction.
Yes, I think that was already very clear for Rudolf Steiner, that this bringing about a spiritual culture out of the European spiritual esoteric tradition was on his heart. And there was a certain tension in the Theosophical Society, which had also, through Annie Besant, and before that with Madame Blavatsky, it had its connections to the Orient, very strong connections. And Rosicrucianism, Rudolf Steiner, from this point, from Munich on, he does talk more and more about Rosicrucianism. Of course, for example, in this course, clearly it's the theosophy of the Rosicrucian. It's not a theosophy that is coming out of the wisdom of the Vedas or out of the Oriental tradition.
So on the first evening we had this introduction to the Munich conference and some of its, I suppose, content, its architectural forms. And in the morning we began to experience that a little bit the following morning. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what has been done artistically on that second day?
Well, we in a way, what we were doing on the second day was a continuation of a workshop that took place last February. In that weekend that we had last February, we had worked as a group, also on the Munich conference, and in the artistic work we had created these 7 seals, these apocalyptic pictures, which carry this framework of the Book of Revelations, and looked a little bit at that and how these 7 images carry an interpretation or images, and images that are entrances into an understanding of world evolution as it's expressed through this book. What we did then on our first morning, on the second day of our workshop, was we worked with the columns, with these columns which express forces that are planetary forces, which we live in maybe barely consciously of at the moment. We're all, of course, aware of our days of the week are named after the evolutionary planetary sequence, and we have a sense of evolution in the passage of a week, and that it has different qualities. The sequence starts with Saturday, with Saturn, and goes then to Sun, to Moon, to Mars, to Mercury, to Jupiter and Venus. And our sense, even of our dim sense of the qualities of each day of the week, a certain weightiness that Saturn has, and Sunday has a certain buoyancy to it, and breath is coming into it. Monday has a certain reflection in it. It's not always pleasant, but you're definitely reflected on a Monday. And Tuesday has will to it. You get going. You've stepped away from the past a bit and you're moving on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday and you're in the middle of the week and a certain ordering comes, a certain overview of the week. You come to a Thursday and you in a way can make a judgment of what you've achieved in the week. And then on a Friday, well, thank God it's Friday. You come and your gratitude. These are at heart, these planetary qualities. And Rudolf Steiner, he describes that in spiritual research, the perception of these planetary qualities is the perception of the higher spiritual world. and that it's not a seeing, rather it's a hearing. It's a hearing of tone. And these columns, as he expresses them, they are sculptural, although how we created them and how they were in Munich was just in 2 dimensions. But they are 3-dimensional, and they are moving in constant dynamic form and rhythm. And there is, they're like standing waves in a river, each of a different quality.
One of the extraordinary things about these pillars isn't just that they represent these, of course, but that there is this moving quality as you go from one pillar to the next, that they're snapshots of a dynamic movement that's happening in the space between the pillars. And one of the other things that is brought through the Munich conference, of course, are these planetary seals that we looked at on our second morning of practical work. I'm just wondering a little bit how these two differ as qualities. One, obviously, is a column that's going from below to above or above to below, but the planetary seals have a very different quality and feel to them. They're not the same as the pillars, even though they're also planetary. So could you maybe talk a little bit about what that is?
Well, they are, of course, very, very related. In a way, one could almost say that the planetary seal is the parent of the column. The column is the child of the seal. When one's working at the seal, and as we were working with it in clay in 3 dimensions, one became aware that this 3-dimensional disc form that one's working with is flowing, and it has a periphery and a dynamic belonging to the periphery, and it has a dynamic belonging to the center. And in between these 2 dynamics, there is a conversation taking place. And how the planetary quality expresses itself in the conversation determines how a middle form arises between the center and the periphery. And this is very different with each of the seals. And it's always interesting to see how people choose which one they want to work with. And there's always someone said, "Oh, it looks so easy to do Saturn, I'll just do that one, thank you," because it looks like it's got lots of empty spaces in it. And when you begin to work with the dynamic and you realize it's actually like a standing wave in a river or in a stream. I think that's such a good analogy. It's certainly one that works, that you're working with something that, although it's solid in clay, but the dynamic of what you're doing, if you have before you an approximate imagination of what it is, it's in movement. And you're trying to draw something that is in movement into the clay. And always with this reference to, and you're going back and forth between what the periphery needs, what the center needs, and the dialogue in between, in the center of the form. And each form, of course, is a reflection of the whole organism of all of the forms. There being 7 forms, and each form in itself has 7 parts to it. So this tonal expression, musical expression, is there.
Yes, this seems to be a recurring theme, this sort of musicality and this sense of movement in the architectural. And while this is sort of embryonic in the Munich conference, we took another step on this second evening where you spoke about this movement from, I suppose, old mysteries into sort of intermediary mysteries on towards new mysteries, and how those found expression in the Goetheanum. And maybe you can speak a little bit about what the Goetheanum is, how it came about, and what that transition really looks like. Because, I mean, there is a significant step between the Munich conference and the building of the first Goetheanum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were, of course, as in so often in the case of Rudolf Steiner's life, there were individuals who asked key questions. And after the Munich conference, a young architect, von Baravalla, came to Rudolf Steiner and asked him, well, how could we take these forms and create a building? And out of that impulse, over the next 18 months, a building was developed and created near to Karlsruhe, which was the first actual space that was really developed to Rudolf Steiner's full intention. It had 2 rows of columns, of the planetary columns, one on either side in a way, and it was a cylindrical shape with a domed ceiling, and outside of the columns there was a gallery, a walkway, and that also had a domed space above it, which finished in an arch, and in each of the arches there was painted these images, these seals from the Book of Revelations. So one had the columns, and one had a space there held within the columns, and in the dome above this cylindrical space where the columns were, one had the zodiac represented. So one had this planetary world, our soul, astral world, and also this world of the spirit. And one had it all held within these images of the totality of the evolution of the human being and of the world. And the next step that came after that was the development in 1911 in Stuttgart, where in the Anthroposophical Society house there was a lecture theatre created which used the planetary seals, and there was also a room that was really a more festive celebratory room, where they again had the columns and the zodiac and these images from the Book of Revelations. And this was taking it a step further. And at the opening of this building in 1911, Rudolf Steiner gave a lecture with this challenging title, really, are we Theosophists or are we Rosicrucians? And this real differentiation of clarifying anthroposophy's way forward was really part and parcel of the development of the Goetheanum. So that by the time 1913 came and there was really this beginning, this was the time where anthroposophy was becoming clearly identifiable. When the Goetheanum foundation stone is laid, after all their attempts to build it in Munich had come to nothing, it was really quite clear then that by that time the Anthroposophical Society had found its own identity and had been formed. So these grew together, these two things.
So there is this wonderful sort of evolution from this early theosophical work into this artistic work of the Munich conference, and this, I suppose, slowly emerging awareness that there is something other than just theosophy being developed in Central Europe at this time, and that it comes out of these European impulses. Mm-hmm. So the following day, obviously, we were working then with Eurythmy in the morning, and we were working with the foundation stone, or part of the foundation stone, in that. Yeah, there's a next step, isn't there? But maybe we come back to that a little bit later, actually. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the Eurythmy and the clay modelling that happened on the next day, just in terms of how that tied in with the program.
Mm-hmm. Well, we actually made quite a jump the next day, and in that we looked at Rudolf Steiner and Edith Marian's sculptural and modelling work on the representative of humanity, and this whole group of figures that are there around that. And this was, of course, moving. This in a way had been built. The girthianum, as a preparation for the building of the Goetheanum, and before its foundation stone was laying, Rudolf Steiner had for several years devoted himself to spiritual research on the Gospels. And all of his cycles on the Gospels come from this time. And also, as a culmination of that, his speaking about the fifth Gospel. And at the fifth Gospel, there is this very deeply moving prayer, which he refers to and calls this the macrocosmic Lord's Prayer. That this prayer was heard by Jesus of Nazareth before the baptism on his journeys, and it was the prayer of the first hierarchy to the higher hierarchies for the redemption of the earth, for the pain that was on the earth. And that the incarnation of the Christ was an answer, a response to this prayer. And the words from this prayer, these were the foundation stone words of the first Goetheanum, and were placed in September, on the 20th of September 1913, into the foundation stone of the Goetheanum. And this building was devoted to making possible a spiritual pathway through everything that was represented in the building that would strengthen the development of one's own I am. And that strengthening of that I am, coming to that experience, unfolding the experience of the I am, leads and culminates in this meeting with Rudolf Steiner's representation of the representative of humanity, which was, of course, for him, the Christ. And that in a way he describes as being built upon his own personal biography and his very difficult experience at the end of the previous century, when he went through severe trials himself, and these trials culminated in him experiencing innerly a spiritual standing before the mystery of Golgotha. And this experience and this perception informed and enabled the unfolding of the Goetheanum and of this path out of the world in which we live now, and finding a path that shaped one's thinking, one's feeling, and one's willing in a preparation to come to a meeting with the Christ out of one's own unfolding I am. So the work we did, well, we spent a lot of time with observations. We really looked deeply at it on the last morning, and we were helped by the sculptural form indications of Michael Howard, who's an American sculptor who's worked a great deal on the representative, and using the language of these form gestures of sculpture, our observations were able to help us individually to find different parts of the representative that touched us. Mm-hmm. And the group then worked in pairs to help each other to embody these gestures, to copy them or to move them in oneself as a preparation for then working in clay. And we didn't have a huge amount of time. I think all of us felt more time would have been needed. But I think, I mean, you can say yourself as you took part in it, but there was a rich sharing afterwards.
But I do get the sense, because of course this isn't your first time doing this work here, and it seems to be, well, there are people that have worked on this throughout their entire life and still have never considered themselves to be finished. So it seems to be an ongoing work. One of the things that I suppose one could speak about, we have this representative of humanity, and that was a work in process, but this building that was built to go around this representative of humanity, this first Goethanum, of course, burned down. And it burned down on New Year's Eve. And there's another step that happens between this old Goethanum and you could say, in a way, the building of the new Goetheanum, but also that it has a very different quality, because there was a very different foundation stone laid for the second Goetheanum, which brings us really to how we chose to end our work together, which was to speak the foundation stone together. So maybe you could speak a little bit about what that step is in terms of this foundation stone. I know that's a huge question, my God. To try and tease out a little bit of that, I don't know, I could answer that question, but one can maybe start to get a bit of a sense.
Yes, it is of course a huge subject, and we're it's like on the radio. It doesn't help when you start talking about things that all our listeners can't see. Well, there certainly is an architectural relationship between the first Goetheanum and the foundation stone meditation as it was given a year after the burning of the Goetheanum, and perhaps one can best relate to that by seeing that there's an architectural construction to the foundation stone meditation itself. It has these first 3 verses, which are rather like a sonnet in 2 parts. Each one is, and the first one is appealing to the spirit recollection in the life of our willing, and that our willing actually arises out of a greater context. And in the foundation stone, it talks about how out of our living in our limbs, we're carried through this spatial world that we're in, but that walks our destiny towards the spiritual world. And this practice of recalling the spirit brings us into this greater created world in which, in a way, our greater existence is living. And in the Goetheanum itself, you have this threefold structure. If one just looks at the small cupola, or at the large cupola, it's in both cupolas, but I think archetypally in the large cupola, you have these pillars that give a sense of movement and growth and progression and of procession, if you like, as they grow and expand in size. And then, because these pillars are there, they enable the walls to become transparent and translucent, and the windows can be carried, and light is able to come in from outside, and a certain informing of that recollecting of one's journey in life through the will towards the spirit shows itself. So this spirit recollecting, in a way, is a transformation of this progression of the pillars in the first Goetheanum, and the windows that become possible to allow the light to shine between the intervals of the pillars. And then the second aspect in the first Goetheanum is this what pushes up from the earth, as our will does. At a certain point it comes to a culmination, and there one has the capitals and the architrave appearing, and the capitals are bringing to expression something that holds a balance between what's pressing up out of the earth and what's pressing down or bearing down out of the cosmos. So the dome that is above this architrave is like a lens for the cosmos to allow these images of the spiritual world to appear. And between the images that are held in the dome and the pillars that are rising from the earth, this architrave and these capitals, they find a balance. And it's a balance that's a dynamic balance that's moving into a different expression with each of the planetary capitals. So in this dome that is above, one has this realm where the greater cosmos is in a way able to reveal its images of how the human being has actually come about. And a spirit vision, this third verse of the foundation stone meditation, comes into sight. And in between, where the architrave and the capitals are, one has this second verse showing itself in this finding of a balance in rhythms, in a rhythm that is between above and below, and is between Saturn moving through the planetary columns towards Jupiter and Venus in the end. So in that middle section, one has this living in beat and heart and lung, and it's a breathing that senses the whole structure. And it's like a feeling of the whole structure is there, and out of a mindfulness of the whole structure, it's reflected, as if the feeling life of the architecture is shown in the architrave. Mm-hmm. And then in the dome that is above, we have there this resting dome as a in a way as a similar vessel as our head is, that is able in its restfulness to be open to receiving these greater images, these greater thoughts from the spiritual world. And out of this rest, this ground of the eternal allows these thoughts to manifest in this lens of the dome. And a spirit vision comes about. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's Rudolf Steiner's research that made possible what was brought about with the first Goetheanum. And one can see out of this threefoldness how the Goetheanum in a way rose from the ashes with the foundation stone meditation. One could go on to say a little, maybe just to indicate that the last part of the foundation stone meditation, this wonderful Christmas verse, is taking one into the realm of what is calling for the small cupola to open, that space to open wherein in time this growing of the resurrected Christ towards the self-recollecting, self-mindful and self-seeing human soul who is striving to find the Christ.
Goodness, that's a big image, huge image, and yeah, again brings us a little bit full circle.
Yeah,
going from Munich conference through to Goetheanum, through to, I suppose, the seeds of a Goetheanum or a temple of the word being laid in the human being.
Yes, yes. Indeed it does. It's been a very rich few days working together.
It certainly has.
Yeah, and I hope it's something we, before too long, will manage to have another session.
Hopefully so.
Yeah.
We would be very happy to have you back.
Good. Well, thank you, and thank you that we had a chance to talk a bit too.
Thank you so much, Alan.